Let me tell you about the day our entire understanding of mathematics crumbled. Oh, pardon my excitement. I should introduce myself first. I am Professor Cax Thendril, Senior Chair of Theoretical Mathematics at the Galactic Science Academy. And yes, that little laugh you hear in my voice is the sound of someone who has seen the impossible happen. You see, for the past 30 cycles, I've been teaching at what we proudly call the crown jewel of mathematical studies in the known universe, the Galactic Mathematics Institute. Picture, if you will, our crystalline spires reaching toward the triple moons of Centauri Prime, their surfaces refracting light in precisely calculated angles that would make any geometry professor weep with joy. Our halls have housed the brightest minds from over 3,000 species, and our research archives stretch back to the very founding of the Galactic Union. But there's something that had been haunting these hallowed halls for exactly 1,000 years. We called it the probability cascade problem, or as my more dramatic colleagues like to call it, the universe's favorite joke. If only they knew how funny it would actually become. Now, lean in close, because this is important. The probability cascade problem wasn't just any mathematical puzzle. No. This was the mathematical equivalent of a black hole sitting in the middle of our understanding of reality. It started simple enough, a basic question about predicting quantum state cascades across multiple dimensional boundaries. But then it grew, consuming theory after theory, proof after proof, until it became a monster that ate careers and spit out broken mathematicians. The greatest minds in the galaxy had tried to solve it. The hive mind of Beetle 6 devoted an entire century to it. The silicon consciousness of Mechanica Prime ran calculations for 300 years straight. Even the legendary Professor Brightcrest, may his equations rest in peace, spent his final decades muttering about cascade variables in his sleep. We had entire wings of the Institute dedicated to failed attempts at solving it. Rooms full of quantum computers humming away at partial solutions. Graduate students would whisper about it in the corridors, placing bets on which professor would be the next to announce their groundbreaking solution, only to discover yet another dead end. Do you want to know the really funny part? We were proud of our failure. Yes, proud. We saw it as proof of how complex and sophisticated our mathematical understanding had become. Look at this beautiful problem, we'd say at conferences, sipping our fermented number juice. So elegant, so complex, so impossible to solve. We even had a ceremony every year where we'd present it to new students, watching their antennae droop or their photoreceptors dim as they realized the magnitude of what they were seeing. Oh, if I could go back to those smug, self-satisfied days and warn myself about what was coming. But then again, would I have believed it? Would anyone have believed that our most cherished mathematical mystery was about to be unraveled by a species we had classified as barely civilized? Now, about that human student who walked into my classroom. It was during the Great Migration season, when the cosmic winds painted our skies in swirling purples and blues, that Sarah Chen first walked into my advanced theoretical mathematics lecture. Now, when I say walked, I mean she walked. You see, most of our students either hover, slither, or occasionally materialize. But humans? They stride in on 2 legs like they're trying to stamp their existence into the very fabric of reality. Sarah stood there, all 5 feet and 7 inches of her, looking absolutely ridiculous in our standard atmospheric protection suit. We'd had to special order it, reinforced to withstand the bone-crushing strength humans casually exert while doing something as simple as writing with a stylus. The sight of her caused quite the commotion. Professor Lunara actually extended all 4 of her warning frills, and poor student Zip, well, he accidentally teleported himself 3 classrooms over in sheer panic. "Good morning, Professor Thendril," she said, her voice carrying that distinctive human warmth that always sounds like they're either about to hug you or hunt you down. "I hope you received my transfer documents from Earth's Massachusetts Institute of Technology." I distinctly remember my third heart skipping a beat. Yes, we'd received her documents, along with 16 pages of safety protocols, 3 emergency containment procedures, and one very strongly worded note about something called coffee being essential for optimal human cognitive function. The Academy Board had spent 3 cycles debating whether allowing a Deathworlder into our most prestigious program was worth the insurance risk. "Ah, yes, Student Chen," I managed to say, trying not to show my nervousness as she took a seat. The reinforced chair creaked ominously. We'd had to replace all the furniture in her designated area with military-grade materials. "Welcome to Advanced Quantum Probability Theory." The other students gave her a wide berth, about 15 feet to be precise, which happens to be the average sprinting distance most species need to reach safety if a human suddenly, well, does anything sudden. I noticed several students had activated their personal shields, and at least one had written their last will and testament on their datapad. But here's the thing about Sarah Chen that really got under our exoskeletons. She was unfailingly, irritatingly pleasant. When Professor Lunara accidentally assigned her triple the normal workload, she submitted it early. When the cafeteria served her silicon-based nutrition packets, because someone had misplaced her specialized human food supplies, she just smiled and pulled something called instant ramen from her bag. The faculty lounge became a hotbed of whispered concerns and thinly veiled speciesism. "Did you know," Professor Rax Voss would say during our quantum coffee breaks, "that humans evolved on a planet so horrific they developed redundant organs? They have a backup breathing system. Who needs a backup breathing system? What kind of species expects to have their primary breathing apparatus regularly damaged?" Even I must admit with some shame, found myself falling into these prejudices. During the first few lectures, I caught myself using simpler terms, speaking slower, even drawing basic diagrams, as if a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel could possibly grasp our advanced mathematical concepts. But then came the day of her first quantum probability exam. I had designed it to be particularly challenging, perhaps more challenging than strictly necessary. When I received her completed test, I expected to find the usual Deathworlder approach, brute force calculations and primitive approximations. Instead, I found myself looking at the most elegant solution to a complex quantum uncertainty equation I'd seen in decades. Her approach was unconventional, yes, but it worked. It more than worked. It was beautiful. She had somehow combined 3 different mathematical principles in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Yet there it was, practically singing off the page. And that was when the first crack appeared in our collective academic armor. That was when some of us began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, we had made some assumptions about humans that needed revisiting. Little did we know, this was just the prelude. The real shock was still to come, and it would begin with a simple question during our annual presentation of the probability cascade problem. Ah, the annual presentation. Let me tell you about that fatefully hilarious day when our academic pride came crashing down like a poorly calculated quantum wave function. The grand lecture hall was packed tighter than a neutron star. Every being who considered themselves even marginally important in the mathematical community had gathered for our yearly tradition of collective intellectual humiliation. Dean Brightcrest stood at the podium, his bioluminescent spots glowing with that particular shade of smug azure that senior academics perfect over centuries of telling others they're wrong. "And so," he proclaimed, his translator barely keeping up with his excited clicks and whistles, "we gather once again to contemplate the greatest mathematical mystery of our age, the probability cascade problem." The holographic display burst to life behind him, equations spinning in complex patterns that would give most beings a headache. In fact, Student Zip did get a headache, all 3 of his brains simultaneously. As was tradition, Dean Brightcrest began recounting the most spectacular failures of the past year. Professor Quantum Wave from the Arcturus Academy believed he had solved it using a revolutionary approach involving 11-dimensional probability matrices. A pause for dramatic effect. He is now teaching basic arithmetic to juvenile Varaxians. The audience chittered appreciatively at this subtle academic destruction. The Synthetic Intelligence Collective of Rigel Beta spent 3 months computing an approach using quantum-entangled processors. Another theatrical pause. They have since decided to focus on calculating lottery numbers instead. More appreciative laughter, though several artificial beings in the audience noticeably dimmed their optical sensors in embarrassment. I was just settling in for another delightfully cruel session of watching dreams get crushed when I noticed something odd. Sarah Chen, sitting in her reinforced chair in the front row, everyone else had insisted on maintaining the 15-foot safety radius, was giggling. Not the polite, professional chuckle of academics enjoying another's failure, but the kind of genuine amusement humans display when they've spotted something obviously silly that everyone else has missed. The dean noticed too. His spots shifted to a concerned magenta. "Does something amuse you, Student Chen?" And then she did it. She raised her hand. Now you must understand, nobody raises their hand during the annual presentation. It's simply not done. It's like trying to add numbers to infinity, or dividing by 0, or attempting to explain humidity to a plasma being. "Yes," she said, standing up with that distinctly human confidence that makes the rest of us check our emergency exits. "I believe I see where everyone's been going wrong. May I?" She gestured toward the floating equations. The silence in the hall was absolute. You could have heard a photon drop. Professor Lunara's warning frills extended so far they knocked over her ceremonial calculation rod. Dean Brightcrest's spots cycled through colors so quickly he looked like a malfunctioning party illumination device. "You wish to attempt a solution?" The dean's translator actually glitched on the word attempt, making it sound like a cross between a laugh and a cough. "Well," Sarah said, pulling out her archaic paper notebook. "Yes, actual processed plant matter that humans still inexplicably use. I've been looking at this during lunch breaks. Your approach to quantum probability is fundamentally, how do I put this politely, overcomplicated." The dean's spots settled on a dangerous shade of ultraviolet. "Overcomplicated? This problem has resisted the finest minds in the galaxy for a millennium." "Exactly," Sarah beamed, already walking toward the equation display. "Everyone's been so focused on making it complex enough to match its reputation, nobody tried making it simpler." As she reached for the holographic controls, I heard Professor Raxvos whisper to me, "This will be spectacular. Should we call the medical team now or wait until she starts crying?" I wish I'd recorded his expression for posterity when Sarah Chen, that magnificent Deathworlder, looked back at the audience with a grin that would make a stellar predator proud and said, "Watch this." No one in that hall realized we were about to witness history being made. Well, unmade. Actually more like crumpled up into a ball and tossed into the nearest black hole. What happened next has been recorded, studied, and quite frankly, caused several minor mental breakdowns across multiple academic institutions. Let me paint you the picture of how a human dismantled a millennium of mathematical certainty in roughly 7 minutes. Sarah Chen stood before the hovering equations, her atmosphere suit reflecting the holographic glow. With movements that made several professors flinch, humans do tend to gesture rather emphatically, she began rearranging the probability matrices. And when I say rearranging, I mean she was dragging 1,000-year-old mathematical constants around like furniture in a dorm room. "See, here's your first problem," she announced, circling a particularly dense cluster of equations. "You're treating quantum uncertainty like it's trying to hide something from you. Like it's a puzzle box that needs more and more complex tools to crack open." Professor Lunara's frills were twitching so violently they were creating their own breeze. "That's because it is hiding something. The cascade effect creates untraceable probability paths that—" No, Sarah interrupted, actually laughing as she deleted entire sections of the classical approach. "It's not hiding anything. It's actually trying really hard to show you something, but you keep covering it up with extra math." The audience erupted in multiple languages of protest. Dean Brightcrest's spots were now flashing in patterns that would probably be considered profanity in some star systems. I heard at least 3 different professors beginning to recite the fundamental theories of mathematics, like a prayer. But Sarah wasn't done. Oh no, she was just warming up. "Look," she continued, pulling up the 3-dimensional visualization of the cascade effect. "You're all treating this like it's a top-down problem, but what if we look at it sideways?" With a gesture that made half the room gasp, she rotated the entire probability model 90 degrees. The holographic display flickered, trying to compensate for this completely unconventional perspective. "Now, see these patterns?" She traced her finger through the shifting numbers. "They're not random at all. They're actually forming a rhythm. A beat, if you will, like music." "Music?" Professor Rax Voss actually choked on his quantum coffee. "This is advanced theoretical mathematics, not some primitive human entertainment." Sarah's grin grew wider. "But that's exactly it. The universe doesn't care about our theoretical mathematics. It's dancing to its own tune, and we're too busy writing complex sheet music to hear it." She began simplifying equations at a speed that made our processors lag. Where we had built elaborate mathematical scaffolding, she was putting simple, elegant bridges. Where we had created multi-layered probability filters, she just let the numbers flow. "The cascade isn't failing because it's too complex," she explained, her hands moving like she was conducting an orchestra of mathematics. "It's failing because you're trying to force it into a rigid framework. It's like trying to measure a river by freezing it. Sure, you can do it, but you're missing the whole point of what makes it a river." And then she wrote it. The equation. The equation. So simple it was almost offensive. So elegant it was almost painful to look at. 3 lines of mathematical notation that somehow impossibly perfectly described the behavior of quantum probability cascades across all known dimensional boundaries. The silence that followed was so profound, I swear I could hear the electrons spinning in the atoms around us. Dean Brightcrest stumbled forward, his spots now a pale, shocked white. That can't... Computer! Verify this solution!" The Institute's quantum computer hummed to life. We all held our breath, or whatever passed for breathing in our respective species. The verification process that usually took days, sometimes weeks, began running through the simplified model. 10 seconds later, the computer chimed. "Solution verified. Probability cascade problem resolved. All test cases successful. No exceptions found. Would you like me to compose a celebratory song about this historic moment?" The room exploded into chaos. Professor Lunara fainted, all 4 warning frills going limp at once. Student Zip accidentally teleported himself through 3 walls in excitement. Professor Rax Voss was alternating between laughing and crying, creating a sound I'm pretty sure hadn't been heard in our galaxy before. And there stood Sarah Chen, looking at her solution with the kind of satisfaction humans usually reserve for what they call pizza. "You know what's really funny?" she said, turning to face the stunned audience. "Back on Earth, this is basically a variation of how we model weather patterns. We've been doing something similar since our digital age. We just never thought to apply it to quantum mechanics, because everyone told us it was supposed to be way more complicated than that." Dean Brightcrest, still staring at the elegantly simple solution, managed to whisper, 1,000 years, the greatest minds in the galaxy, and you solved it using weather mathematics. "Well," Sarah shrugged, that terrifyingly wonderful human grin still on her face. "Sometimes the hardest part of solving a problem is forgetting everything you think you know about it." I remember looking at those 3 lines of equations, feeling 1,000 years of academic pride crumbling around me, and experiencing what humans call the giggles. Because she was right. We had been so busy trying to make the problem match our expectations of its difficulty that we'd missed the beautiful simplicity hiding right in front of us. The probability cascade problem, the great mathematical mountain that had challenged the finest minds in the galaxy, had just been solved by a human using what basically amounted to sophisticated weather forecasting techniques. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. The chaos that followed Sarah Chen's solutions spread across the galaxy faster than a quantum entanglement cascade. Let me tell you about the absolute pandemonium that ensued, both hilarious and terrifying in equal measure. The first week was pure, unadulterated academic anarchy. The Galactic Mathematics Institute's communication systems nearly melted down from the sheer volume of incoming messages. We had everyone from the High Council of Theoretical Physics to the Quantum Monastery of Beta Centauri demanding confirmations, explanations, and in one particularly amusing case, a formal inquiry into whether humans were actually ancient elder beings disguised as primitive Deathworlders. Professor Lunara locked herself in her office for 3 days, emerging only to announce she was rewriting her last 30 years of published works. The sight of her trying to carry 300 data crystals while all her warning frills were still fully extended. Well, let's just say the maintenance droids had quite a mess to clean up. The really entertaining part, every attempt to complicate Sarah's solution failed spectacularly. The more prestigious the mathematician, the more embarrassing their failure. The hive mind of Beetle 6 tried adding 7 new dimensional variables to improve the equation. Their solution ended up predicting that the universe was actually a banana. Not metaphorically, an actual banana. But the real revolution wasn't just in solving the probability cascade problem. No, that was just the beginning. Sarah's approach, this maddeningly simple perspective, began infecting other areas of mathematical theory. Professor Rax Voss, after consuming what he claims was a totally reasonable amount of fermented number juice, applied her principles to his work on quantum gravity. He solved it in 3 hours. Then he cried for 2 days. The changes to our curriculum were substantial. Imagine centuries of carefully constructed mathematical principles being reassessed through the lens of, but what if we're just making it needlessly complicated? The horror, the humanity. Actually, yes, precisely, the humanity of it all. I personally watched a third-year student solve a problem that had been designated senior level only by asking, what if we just turned it upside down? The student's name? Zip. Yes, the same Zip who had been teleporting himself through walls in panic just weeks earlier. The little teleporter started a trend of approaching problems from literally every spatial direction possible. The really profound impact, though, was on how we viewed humans. We had categorized them as emerging intelligences, fascinating in their resilience, but surely limited in their cognitive capabilities. After all, they had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them in hundreds of different ways every day. How sophisticated could their problem-solving be? The answer, as it turned out, was terrifyingly sophisticated. Their very survival on that death trap they call Earth had forced them to develop a kind of mathematical and scientific intuition that we, in our safe, controlled environments, had never needed. Where we saw complexity as a challenge to be revered, they saw it as an obstacle to be simplified. Here's a humbling thought. While we were busy building elaborate theoretical frameworks to explain the universe, humans were busy trying not to die from their own planet's weather. They had to understand probability patterns, just to know whether they could go outside without being struck by lightning or swept away by tornadoes. Their primitive survival skills had given them insights we had spent millennia overlooking. I remember asking Sarah during one of our now famous coffee and quantum mechanics sessions. Yes, we finally figured out how to synthesize coffee after 3 explosion-filled attempts. Why humans seem to have such a different approach to problem-solving. She laughed, that warm, slightly terrifying human laugh, and said, "When you grow up on a planet that randomly decides to shake itself apart or throw superheated clouds at you, you learn pretty quickly not to overcomplicate things. Sometimes the difference between survival and death is how fast you can simplify a problem." That statement changed me. Changed all of us, really. We began looking at our other unsolvable problems differently. What else had we been overcomplicating? What other solutions were hiding behind our assumptions of difficulty? The universe, we were learning, had a far better sense of humor than we had given it credit for. And humans? Well, they were turning out to be the cosmic joke's perfect punchline. 10 cycles have passed since Sarah Chen turned our mathematical world upside down, and the ripples of that day continue to spread across the galaxy. The changes? Well, they've been both profound and frankly hilarious. First, the Galactic Education Council did something unprecedented. They made human perspective studies a mandatory course for all advanced degree programs. Yes, you heard that correctly. We now have distinguished professors teaching courses on how to think less complexly. The irony of watching Professor Lunara, with all 4 warning frills extensively decorated in academic regalia, teaching a class called The Art of Human Simplification, never ceases to amuse me. The humans, bless their terrifying hearts, found our reaction to their problem-solving methods endlessly entertaining. They started sending us more exchange students, each one seemingly more casually brilliant than the last. We had to establish new safety protocols, yes, but also new paradigms for what we considered proper academic approaches. Remember Professor Raxvos, the one who had been so skeptical? He now runs a revolutionary think tank called Deathworlder Dynamics, where academics are encouraged to solve problems while experiencing simulated Earth conditions. Watching highly respected mathematicians trying to calculate quantum uncertainties while dealing with simulated rain, gravity fluctuations, and temperature changes is, well, let's just say the viewing records are among our most popular entertainment streams. The galaxy's most prestigious mathematical journal, Quantum Quarterly, had to create a new section called Simple Solutions to Complex Problems, or as the humans like to call it, have you tried turning it off and on again? Some of the most groundbreaking papers in recent history have come from this section, though we did have to add a warning label. Caution. Solutions may appear alarmingly straightforward. But perhaps the most significant change has been in our understanding of intelligence itself. We had spent millennia believing that advanced problem-solving required increasingly complex approaches. The humans showed us that true sophistication often lies in finding the elegant simplicity hidden within apparent complexity. Student Zip, by the way, went on to revolutionize teleportation physics by applying what he called the Chen principle of unnecessary complication. He succeeded by literally asking, "What if we stop trying so hard?" He's now head of the Institute's new Department of Human-Inspired Physics, though he still occasionally teleports through walls when excited. Oh, and Sarah Chen? Well, after causing what some call the great mathematical humbling, she went on to solve 3 more impossible problems before lunch the following day. She claimed she was just tidying up loose ends before heading home. She now holds a position that was created specifically for her, Grand Simplifier of Unnecessarily Complex Theories. And as for me, well, here's the twist that still makes me chuckle every time I think about it. Remember how I introduced myself as Professor Cax Thendril, Senior Chair of Theoretical Mathematics? Well, that was my old position. After the Chen event, as we now call it, I underwent what humans call a career epiphany. I now hold a rather unique position. I am the galaxy's first Professor of Human Integration Studies, specializing in helping brilliant but overwhelmed alien mathematicians understand why sometimes the best solution is the one that doesn't require 17 dimensions and a supercomputer to calculate. Yes, I can hear you laughing. The professor who once needed 3 hearts to handle the stress of having a human in his classroom now spends his days teaching others to think more like them. The universe does love its little jokes, doesn't it? My office, now decorated with various Earth weather patterns, I find them oddly soothing these days, has a framed copy of Sarah's original 3-line solution. Below it, written in both standard Galactic and English, is my favorite human phrase, "Keep it simple, stupid." And you know what? They were right. The universe isn't trying to hide its secrets from us. Sometimes it's literally screaming them in our faces, and all we need to do is stop being too proud to listen. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lecture to prepare for the incoming class of quantum physicists. Today's topic? Why humans solve problems by making them smaller instead of making their brains bigger. And yes, coffee will be served. We've finally learned that some human traditions are worth adopting, even if they do make our third hearts race a bit.